We live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
North Korea fires 2 unidentified projectiles into the sea and launches a scathing rejection of foolish calls for dialogue from South Korean President Moon Jae-in.
Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement faces a major test this weekend as it tries to muster another huge crowd following criticism over a recent violent airport protest and as concerns mount over Beijing's next move.
Israel says it will allow one of 2 U.S. Muslim congresswomen it had barred for advocating a boycott of the country to make a humanitarian visit to her grandmother in the occupied West Bank.
A man dubbed the Hollywood Ripper was found guilty Thursday of the murders of 2 women, including a student who was due to go out with actor Ashton Kutcher the night of her death.
I'm Mama Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
Now to the news. North Korea fired 2 unidentified projectiles into the sea on Friday. It also launched a scathing attack on, quote, foolish calls for dialogue from South Korean President Moon Jae-in. It was the 6th round of launches in recent weeks in protest at ongoing joint military drills between Seoul and the U.S. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has described the tests as a solemn warning to the South. The South Korean military said the projectiles were fired from near the city of Tongchon in Gangwon province and flew some 230 kilometers before falling into the sea, also known as the Sea of Japan. The latest test came as the North said it rejected comments by South Korean President Moon Jae-in on Thursday outlining his desire for unification. North Korea said it had nothing more to discuss with the South. It also called President Moon an, quote, impudent guy rare to be found for hoping for a resumption of the inter-Korean talks while continuing military drills with Washington. The tests come also as plans to resume working-level talks between the North and Washington appear to have stalled. Pyongyang recently said nuclear talks will be strictly between the North and the U.S., refusing to hold separate dialogue with the South.
Hong Kong's police are confident they have the resources to continue battling pro-democracy protesters even if violence escalates further, pouring cold water on concerns that the authoritarian mainland might need to intervene. 3 senior commanders said they were unaware of any plans by China to bolster their own ranks with mainland troops or police officers, even if the political chaos worsens. And they admitted that any move to do so would place the city's police force in uncharted waters. But they insisted the issue was moot because the local force could handle the crisis. As China takes an increasingly hardline tone, state media have published images of military personnel and armored vehicles across the border in Shenzhen this week. The United States has warned Beijing against sending in troops, a move many analysts say would be a reputational and economic disaster for China.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement faces a major test this weekend as it tries to muster another huge crowd following criticism over a recent violent airport protest and as concerns mount over Beijing's next move. Chinese state media have put out images of military personnel and armored personnel carriers across the border in Shenzhen, while the United States has warned Beijing against sending in troops, a move many analysts say would be reputational and economic disaster for China. The nationalistic Global Times newspaper said there would not be a repeat of the Tiananmen Square crackdown in which hundreds or even thousands are believed to have been killed if Beijing moves to quash the protests. Hong Kong's protests were sparked by opposition to a plan to allow extraditions to the mainland, but it has since morphed into a wider call for democratic rights in the semi-autonomous city. Millions of people have hit the streets while clashes have broken out between police and small groups of hardcore protesters for 10 consecutive weekends. For most of that time, U.S. President Donald Trump has taken a hands-off approach to the unrest, but began speaking up this week. He suggested any potential trade deal with Beijing could be upended by a violent response from the mainland. Speaking on Thursday, local time, President Trump urged Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to meet protesters and solve the crisis humanely.
I really would like to see China in a humane way solve the problem in Hong Kong. Humanely solve the problem in Hong Kong. And I think they could do it very quickly. You know, I said yesterday, I really have a lot of confidence in President Xi. I know that if he sat down with their representatives, I have no doubt he would solve that problem quickly. I will speak to him. We have a call scheduled soon, President Xi. We'll be speaking to him very soon. I really believe he can work it out. I know him well. If he wants to, he can work that out in a very humane fashion. He can work something that everybody's happy.
When do you want to meet him?
Watching the Hong Kong protests from afar, Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei fears the worst, warning of a repeat of the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown in Beijing.
Chinese government eventually, if they cannot make this demonstration disappear, they will use violence. There's no other way they can talk about the situation or negotiate. That's not the skill they have. All they have is military and the police. I don't think any predictions to make, and as a society would sacrifice anything for maintain its control. The violence is not just physical. The violence is the mentally being refused to have any discussion. This kind of violence is a state violence. It's horrible. And so compared to what states has been doing, there's no violence from the protesters.
Ai's bleak warning comes after 2 months of protests that have turned increasingly violent, and as Beijing has massed security forces nearby on the mainland in a show of force. Although most analysts consider a full-blown crackdown unlikely, fears of wars to come have hovered over the former British colony that was returned in China to China in 1997. Ai, a long-time and outspoken government critic, says he has no illusions that Beijing values order above all else. Ai, China's best-known modern artist around the world, once helped design Beijing's Bird's Nest Olympic Stadium, but later found himself at the receiving end of the state's wrath. The New York-trained artist had confronted authorities, especially after the 2008 Sichuan earthquake, charging that corruption and shoddily built state schools or school buildings had heightened the death toll. Ai was detained for 81 days in 2011 amid a crackdown on Dissent. His passport was confiscated and only returned to him in 2015, after which he moved to Berlin.
I share their frustration. I see myself as one of them, and I see them as part of me. So I would do interviews every day. I would do my online activities in supporting them to give a voice to global world.
Ai also took aim at Western countries, charging that too many are scared to stand up to Beijing and endanger their commercial interests.
In a related news, Lee Cheng-hei runs a pop-up store in Hong Kong. But instead of offering the latest food trends or fashion must-haves, he sells another highly sought-after commodity: protest supplies. Take a look.
Feel like need some of them. The cold box.
6,000蚊，因為咧我自己就好中意收集呢啲3M 口罩嘅，咁所以我屋企就好大量嘅3M 口罩存貨嘅，咁但係唔好意思，今日就真係賣晒啦。
我喺終點等嘅。
咁樣以後咁樣街都有人認得你。應該喺呢度喎。我哋攞有冇錢嚟攞？
年輕人連死都唔怕，我哋又點解怕去身敗名裂或者破產或者蝕錢？錢可以再揾個，命就冇嘅。揾錢有好多嘅契機，但係革命、抗爭或者推到一個政權，機會唔會有幾多次。
Daredevil Alain Robert, dubbed the French Spider-Man, climbs a Hong Kong skyscraper and unfurls a peace banner as the financial hub is rocked by political unrest. The 57-year-old adventurer, she made up the 68-story Chung Kong Center in Hong Kong's main business district in hot and humid conditions on Friday morning. Prior to the ascent, Robert put out a statement saying the message of his climb was to make an urgent appeal for peace and consultation between Hong Kong people and their government. Robert has regularly come to Hong Kong to scale buildings in a city that boasts the highest concentration of skyscrapers in the world. He has climbed the Chung Kong Center twice before. Last August, he was banned by Hong Kong court from making any more climbs after he was charged over a 2011 illegal ascent of the 27th floor Hang Seng Bank building. At the time, he vowed to return to Hong Kong as soon as the ban expired. In January, he was arrested after climbing a 47-story tower in Manila.
Italy has evacuated a handful of medical cases from a Spanish migrant rescue ship off the coast of Lampedusa, as the boat remained in limbo on Friday despite a European deal to take in 134 people remaining on board. This is the umpteenth standoff between a charity vessel rescuing migrants making the perilous journey across the Mediterranean and Italy's far-right Interior Minister Matteo Salvini, but this time set against the background of a political crisis in Rome. Thursday saw sparring between Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and Salvini, who last week pulled his party's support from the ruling coalition in the hope of toppling the 14-month-old government. France, Germany, Romania, Portugal, Spain, and Luxembourg have told me that they are ready to welcome the migrants, Conte said in an open letter to Salvini, who has sought to bar all charity rescue vessels from entering Italian waters. Conte slammed what he called Salvini's obsessive focus on an immigration policy reduced to the phrase closed ports. Salvini has taken a hard line against migrants rescued at sea being brought to Italy. Which he says bears an unfair burden as the first port of call for refugees from several countries. Earlier this month, Mr. Salvini signed a decree banning the open arms from Italian waters, saying it was to protect public order. But Proactiva appealed to an administrative court which on Wednesday suspended the decree. Salvini then signed a new one blocking the ship. But in a demonstration of his diminished power, Italy's defense minister blocked it again on Thursday.
Il Presidente Conte ha fatto uno sfogo umorale, è mio dovere rispondere in base alle leggi e alle convenzioni internazionali. Riassumo quello che i nostri tecnici e giuristi hanno messo per iscritto in 3 pagine. Una nave straniera in acque internazionali non si capisce che attinenza abbia con l'Italia. Italiano, anche perché ricordo che i primi immigrati soccorsi dall'Open Arms risalgono al 1° di agosto, oggi è il 15, in 15 giorni sarebbero andati e tornati dalla Spagna per 3 volte.
Israel said Thursday it will bar a planned visit by 2 U.S. Muslim congresswomen who have supported a boycott of the country over its treatment of the Palestinians, a decision strongly encouraged by President Donald Trump. Israel announced its decision shortly after Trump called on the country to bar the Democratic congresswoman.
Well, I'm only involved from the standpoint of they are very anti-Jewish and they're very anti-Israel. I think it's disgraceful, the things they've said. You have lists of, this isn't just a one-line mistake. What they've said about Israel and Jewish people is a horrible thing, and they've become the face of the Democrat Party. So I did absolutely put out a very strong statement. I think if you look at their language, if you look at what they've said, if I ever said it, it would be a horrible month, to put it mildly. So the things that they've said, Omar, Tlaib, what they've said is disgraceful. So I can't imagine why Israel would let them in. But if they want to let them in, they can. But I can't imagine why they would do it. No, I don't encourage or discourage. I think that if Israel allowed them to come in for the normal reasons, other than those reasons, I really believe that it would be a terrible thing for Israel. I think it would show a terrible sign. They want to do boycotts. They said horrible things about Jewish people. They said horrible things about Israel and Israelis. I think it would be a terrible thing, frankly, for Israel to let these 2 people who speak so badly about Israel come in. And they have become, amazingly, the face of the Democrats. The Democrats don't want to do anything to condemn them. If this were 10 years ago, or if this were maybe a different time or different people or whatever, they would be condemned for the things they've said. They've said some of the worst things I've ever heard said about Israel. So how can Israel say, oh, welcome? I don't think it would be a good thing for Israel.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called a highly unusual move against Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib necessary, charging that their sole purpose to harm Israel and increase incitement against it. U.S. politicians called on Israel to reconsider, while senior Palestinian official Hanan Ashrawi labeled it an outrageous act of hostility against the American people and their representatives. Omar said it was a chilling decision and an insult to democratic values. Omar and Tlaib, who is of Palestinian origin, were expected to arrive in Israel at the weekend for a visit that would have taken them to the Palestinian territories. Prime Minister Netanyahu alleged the itinerary of the congresswoman showed they intended to strengthen the boycott movement against Israel. Israel sees the movement as a strategic threat and accuses it of anti-Semitism, a claim activists deny. Both Omar and Tlaib have been critical of Israel's occupation of the West Bank and treatment of Palestinians. Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel's law prohibits the entry of people who call and act to boycott Israel, as is the case with other democracies that prevent the entry of people whom they see as harming the country. In 2017, Israel passed a law banning entry to foreigners who support boycotting the country in response to a movement that advocates such an embargo.
As an update to that, Israel is to allow a visit by barred U.S. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who is of Palestinian origin on humanitarian grounds, according to the Interior Ministry. It said Interior Minister Aryeh Deri decided to allow Tlaib to make a humanitarian visit to her grandmother in the Israeli-occupied West Bank after the lawmaker had sent him a written pledge to respect conditions imposed by Israel. Tlaib had promised not to promote the cause of the boycott of Israel during her stay in a letter to Deri sent overnight, according to the ministry in a statement. Israeli media published the letter reading, "I would like to request admittance to Israel in order to visit my relatives and specifically my grandmother, who is in her 90s. She added that this could be my last opportunity to see her. I will respect any restrictions, will not promote boycotts against Israel during my visit." On Thursday, Israel announced it would bar a planned visit by Tlaib and fellow Muslim Congresswoman Ilhar Omar over their support of a boycott of the Jewish state for its treatment of the Palestinians. Israeli officials had, however, said they would consider a separate humanitarian request from Tlaib to visit her family, a trip for which she would have to pass through Israel.
Riot police in Zimbabwe fired tear gas and beat demonstrators on Friday during a crackdown on opposition supporters who have taken to Harare's streets despite a protest ban. Scores of people gathered in the capital's Africa Unity Square to demonstrate against the country's worsening economy in defiance of the ban, which was upheld by a court on Friday. Supporters of Zimbabwe's opposition movement for democratic change, or MDC, sang songs condemning police brutality as officers fired tear gas to disperse them. Police also cornered a group of protesters and beat them with batons, with one woman carried into a Red Cross ambulance. Dozens of police and 3 water cannons were involved in running street battles with protesters in the square, which overlooks the country's parliament and is where thousands gathered in November 2017 calling for Robert Mugabe to step down during a military-led coup. Friday's protests went ahead after opposition plans for large-scale marches were banned by police late on Thursday. An MDC attempt to challenge the ban in court was then rejected.
So effectively, the junta has decided to suppress Section 59 of the Constitution using the police, using state resources, using state security forces. So we are not able to proceed with the march today. But definitely it's now effectively a forced stay away for the people of Harare, for the people of Zimbabwe. We are not backing down. We are going forward. The people of Zimbabwe are tired, they are fed up, they want to end this long suffering. So we are proceeding with the marches for a free Zimbabwe. If you go around Harare right now, you will find that the major roads leading to the city have all been sealed off by heavy police presence.
India has eased some restrictions on movement in Kashmir, but phones and the internet remain cut off for a 12th day on Friday, according to a police official in the restive territory. With the central government fearing protests and unrest, Indian-administered Kashmir has been under lockdown since August 4, a day before New Delhi stripped the region of its autonomy. Tens of thousands of extra troops have been deployed, joining 500,000 already there, turning parts of the main city of Srinagar into a fortress of roadblocks and barbed wire. Restrictions in Jammu, the more peaceful Hindu-majority area, have already been lifted, and in the Kashmir Valley, the main hotbed of resistance to Indian rule, there has now been some easing too, according to senior police officer Munir Khan. But he said that Srinagar's Jama Masjid, the main mosque in the Muslim-majority region, with space for thousands of worshippers, also remained shut for Friday prayers. Despite the crackdown last Friday, residents said some 8,000 people took to the streets and that the military used pellet-firing shotguns. Kashmir has been divided between India and Pakistan since independence from Britain in 1947. Tens of thousands of people, most of them civilians, have died in an uprising against Indian rule that has raged since 1989. The territory has been the spark for two wars and countless clashes between the two nuclear-armed arch rivals. Most recently in February, when they conducted tit-for-tat airstrikes.
Seoul residents gathered to mark the 74th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japanese occupation and protest against the policies of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe amid high tensions between the two countries over wartime compensation. Watch this.
아베를 반대하는 일본의 양심적인 민주 시민과 함께 할 것입니다.
네, 감사합니다. 다음은 우리
한일 군사협정 폐기하라.
국민의 파도를 기다리면서 고다시 외치겠습니다. 국민의 힘으로 새학살을 시작! 민족에게 미래는 없다. 언제가 없는 오늘 있을 수 없듯이 역사를 잊은 민족에게 미래는 없다.
To other news now, a man dubbed the Hollywood Ripper was found guilty of the murders of two women. Now, this includes a student who was due to go out with actor Ashton Kutcher the night of her death. Take a look. Michael Gargiulo, 43, was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder by a Los Angeles jury who deliberated for 4 days before reaching their verdict. Prosecutor Dan Ackman had told jurors that Gargiulo targeted the women in frenzied knife attacks, referring to him as a, quote, stone cold serial killer who preys on women. Gargiulo's lawyer said he denied the killings. They said there was no evidence he was at the scene of the 2 murders and indicated that his dissociative identity disorder could have caused him to go into a fog state during a separate attack on a 3rd woman who survived. The trial will move next week to a second phase to assess if he was sane at the time of the killings before sentencing then takes place. He could face the death penalty. He is also awaiting a separate trial for the earlier 1993 killing of a 3rd woman in the state of Illinois. Prosecutor Ackerman said Gargiulo targeted women who lived near him and he waited for the perfect opportunity to attack them at night in or near their homes in totally planned killings. The murdered women had injuries to their breasts and one was found nearly decapitated, he said. Now, 2.5-man actor Ashton Kutcher told jurors he had gone to victim Ashley Ellerin's home in Hollywood in 2001 to pick up her date, but had arrived late and nobody had answered the door. So he said he had looked through a window and seen what he thought was red wine spilled on the floor before leaving, assuming she had already gone out. Now, Ashton Kutcher said he and Ellerin, a 22-year-old fashion design student, were acquaintances. The second victim, meanwhile, the 32-year-old Maria Bruno, was killed in her Los Angeles area apartment in 2005. Gargiulo was arrested in Santa Monica in 2008 following an attack on another woman who survived being stabbed 8 times in her home. He was also found guilty of attempted murder for that case on Thursday.
The eastern DR Congo province of South Kivu has recorded its first confirmed cases of Ebola in the country's year-old epidemic, one of which was a fatality, the provincial government said Friday. 2 cases which tested positive for Ebola was confirmed overnight in South Kivu in Luwindi district in the Mwenga region. It said in a statement a 26-year-old victim died. One of their children who tested positive is still alive and being treated, it said. More than 1,900 people have died from Ebola in Democratic Republic of Congo since August 1st, 2018, when the hemorrhagic virus erupted in North Kivu province and spread to neighboring Ituri province. South Kivu Governor Theo Nwabije told reporters teams from the National Anti-Ebola Coordination Campaign arrived yesterday to provide support. The outbreak is the 10th since Ebola was identified in 1976. It is the deadliest on record after more than 11,000 people were killed in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia between 2014 and 2016.
Now, the Ebola virus causes fever, vomiting, and severe diarrhea, often followed by kidney and liver failure, internal and external bleeding. The disease is spread by contact with infected bodily fluids and is fought with time-honored but laborious techniques of tracing contacts and quarantining them. Here's more.
Ebola is a highly contagious and often deadly virus. People suffering from the disease are only infectious once they develop symptoms. These symptoms appear between 2 and 21 days after infection, usually from 8 to 10 days. The virus targets the body's immune cells. These usually act as a first line of defense, catching and digesting infections. Normally, the immune system is able to boost its defenses to fight off an attack, but the Ebola virus manages to defeat and even destroy immune cells, often ultimately leading to death. Early Ebola symptoms include sudden fever, a general feeling of weakness, muscular pain, headaches, and a sore throat. The virus then attacks and damages cells protecting the blood vessels. This causes bleeding, dehydration, and abnormally low blood pressure. The liver is an organ where the virus can develop quickly, meaning patients often suffer from stomach pain, diarrhea, and vomiting. Some people also experience reddening of the eyes, rashes, hiccups, difficulties breathing and swallowing, internal and external bleeding to death.
Eagle News will be right back. Stay tuned.
Congo, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi.
Cathay Pacific announced the shock resignation on Friday of its CEO Rupert Hogg, days after the Hong Kong carrier was censured by Beijing because some staff had supported pro-democracy protests in the city. In a statement posted on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange on Friday, Cathay said Hogg had resigned to take responsibility as a leader of the company in view of recent events. He has been replaced by Augustus Tang, a veteran of the Swire Group conglomerate, Cathay's main shareholder. Another senior Cathay executive, Chief Customer and Commercial Officer Paul Liu, also announced his departure and gave the same reason in the statement. Cathay has had a torrid week after it became ensnared in a hardening of rhetoric from Beijing over 10 weeks of anti-government protests that have rocked Hong Kong. Over the last 2 weeks, the airline emerged as a target on the mainland after some of its 27,000-strong workforce took part in or voiced support for the protests. Chinese state media wrote a series of condemnations of Cathay, accusing it of not doing enough to rein its workers. Then China's aviation regulator demanded that the airline prevent such staff from working on flights to the mainland or those routed through Chinese airspace. Cathay swiftly moved into damage limitation mode, firing 4 members of staff associated with the protests, including 2 pilots, agreeing to comply with the new regulations and releasing a series of statements supporting Hong Kong's embattled government. But it appears none of these moves were enough to save Hug, who has been credited with helping to turn the airline profitable after 2 years of losses. The board of directors believes that it is the right time for new leadership to take Cathay Pacific forward, Cathay said in a statement. In the same statement, Hug was quoted as saying, "These have been challenging weeks for the airline, and it is right that Paul and I take responsibility as leaders of the company."
The world's largest retailer, Walmart, lifted its full-year profit forecast after better-than-expected results on solid U.S. consumer spending, reflecting confidence that trade frictions will not significantly dent earnings. Amid rising fears of a U.S. recession, the world's biggest retailer said the American consumer is in relatively good shape as it posted another quarter of growth in U.S. comparable sales, a closely watched benchmark jolting shares higher. The company's multi-billion-dollar investment campaign seems to be paying off in the form of online sales that are beginning to rejuvenate the entire long-slumbering colossus. Walmart said full-year earnings per share will range from a slight decrease to a slight increase over last year, an improvement on the original outlook that called for a decline. Customers are responding to the improvements, and we're making the productivity loop, and it's working, and we're gaining market share. This is according to Chief Executive Doug McMillon. Net income was $3.6 billion, up from an $861 million loss in the year-ago period, when one-time costs related to its Brazil business dented results. Revenues rose 1.8% to $130.4 billion. Walmart has been dueling with Amazon over faster home delivery programs. McMillon said Walmart had boosted its competitive position in several categories. That includes food, health and wellness, and toys, attributing the gains to heavy investments in e-commerce and smartphone applications that have strengthened ties to American households. The retail giant has avoided specifics on how it's responding to tariffs on individual items. The company's projections incorporate the latest U.S. tariff plans, including Tuesday's announcement that President Trump is delaying imposition of the new duties on more than half the products targeted for the next round to avoid hitting consumers during the holiday shopping season. Now, that reprieve spared Chinese-made cell phones and many toys, but still hit many consumer categories, including apparel and televisions. Chief Financial Officer Brett Biggs said in a statement, quote, "The fourth round of tariffs set to begin September 1 affects a larger part of our assortment than the prior tariffs." He added that the retailer has been able to thoughtfully manage pricing and margins with both our customers and shareholders in mind. Biggs said the company works with suppliers and tweaks its products in response to tariffs. Analyst Neil Saunders, meanwhile, of Global Data Retail, said the results show Walmart will be a retail winner, even if external factors start to deteriorate.
President Donald Trump on Thursday again signaled his desire for close trading ties with Britain once it leaves the European Union, saying a fantastic deal was in the works.
So we're dealing with the UK on trade and a trade deal, and we're going to have a great deal made. I've been dealing with Boris Johnson. I just spoke to him yesterday. I'll speak to him again. He and I are very much aligned. We feel very good about each other. I think we'll make a fantastic and big trade deal with the UK. Actually, we should do much more business than we're doing with the UK. You know, it's they're probably, I don't want to say our closest because I don't want to insult other people, but certainly, or countries, but certainly they're one of our closest allies anywhere in the world, and we're going to have a fantastic relationship with UK, and we're going to have a great trade deal with UK, and that's moving along rapidly.
Once Britain leaves the European Union, a giant trading bloc, it will have to strike bilateral deals on free trade with separate countries. Pro-Brexit leaders are relying heavily on the traditionally close relationship with the United States, and Trump has sought to raise expectations. Critics of Brexit caution that Trump's aggressive trade negotiating posture has seen him take on China and allies such as Canada or the European Union alike with hardball tactics, including sweeping tariffs on imports to force better conditions for U.S. products.
In other business news, London's FTSE 100 shares index rebounded when it finally opened on Friday after a delay caused by an unspecified trading issue. The benchmark index jumped 0.47% to 7,113.44 points when it finally opened at 0840 GMT, 100 minutes after its expected start. Eurozone stock markets also recovered Friday, with Frankfurt's DAX 30 up 1.1% to 11,534.66 points as the FTSE opened, while the Paris CAC 40 was showing a gain of 0.9% at 5,285.73. The London Stock Exchange Group said it had been investigating a potential trading services issue that prevented the FTSE 100 and second-tier FTSE 250 indices from opening on time at 0700 GMT. The FTSE 250 gained 0.4% when it finally began trading at 0835 GMT. Such events are rare, with the last such delayed start in June last year when the FTSE opened 1 hour late owing to a glitch. World stock markets have endured another volatile week as U.S.-China trade talk hopes fade and following economic data that pointed to a possible global recession.
More news will be coming your way when Eagle News International returns. Stay tuned.
Para sa mga viewer namin sa Middle East at North Africa via OSN, hello sa inyong lahat dyan! Ako po si Julie Fernando.
Ako po si Phoebe. Ako po si Nicole at araw-araw tayo magkasama sa pambansang almusal. Dito sa Net25 at OSN, siguradong at home ka dito.
Landmarks, Linggo, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi.
Norway said Thursday it would halt Amazon protection subsidies worth 30 million euros to Brazil, which it accused of turning its back on the fight against deforestation. Days after Germany also withdrew money promised for forest protection in Brazil, Norway said the South American nation broke the agreement with contributors to the Amazon Fund. The following day, President Bolsonaro said his country had no need for German aid to protect the Amazon.
O que essa briga toda que está tendo, estão me chamando de capitão motosserra, né? Que eu sou o destruidor da Amazônia. O que eles estão de olho na Amazônia? Árvore. Eu já falei aqui, a senhora Angela Merkel, né, que não vai mais mandar aí 80 milhões de euros para o Brasil para preservar a Amazônia. Pega essa grana e refloreste a Alemanha. Qual outro país também? Foi a Suécia, a Noruega? A Noruega também, se não vai mandar mais uma importância equivalente a isso para o Brasil, manda para a Angela Merkel reflorestar a Alemanha.
Matança de baleia na Noruega.
Ninguém não tem moral para dar exemplo para nós. E mais ainda, eles retiram o petróleo lá no Polo Norte, Polo Ártico. Retiram o petróleo de lá. Tá certo? Então esse pessoal que fica fazendo uma campanha contra o Brasil, tá, não é apenas não tem como exemplo, né, para se dar. Eles estão preocupados nas riquezas, não estão preocupados com as árvores da Amazônia, não estão preocupados contigo.
Estão preocupados com o solo, né?
The Amazon is vital for absorbing planet-warming carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and converting it into life-giving oxygen. But concern about the forest has grown since Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro took office in January. Bolsonaro has been accused of favoring his supporters in the logging, mining, and farming sectors. He has pledged to allow more farming and logging in the Amazon and to grant more licenses to the mining industry. Norway was the single largest donor, giving almost 830 million euros to the fund since its creation 11 years ago. Brazil's National Institute for Space Research said last week that roughly 2,254 square kilometers of Amazon were cleared in July, a hike of 278% from a year earlier. The Brazilian government said the data was sensationalist.
In other environment news, more than 500 million people today live in areas affected by erosion linked to climate change. A group of experts urged all countries to commit to sustainable land use to help limit greenhouse gas emissions before it's too late. They also highlighted how the rise in global temperatures linked to increasing pressures on fertile soil risk jeopardizing food security for the planet. Take a look.
Today, 500 million people live in areas that experience desertification. People living in already degraded or desertified areas are increasingly negatively affected by climate change.
When a person migrates, those who left behind are suffering the cause of the migration. So the solution is to work all together in long-term food security systems that promote that these farmers can be resilient and engaged to the markets.
Agricultural practices can help build up carbon in soils, but it could also mean using more bioenergy, with or without carbon capture and storage, and expanding forests. 25 to 30% of food produced is lost or wasted, and reducing food loss and waste can reduce pressure on land, improve food security, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
We humans affect more than 70% of ice-free land. A quarter of this land is degraded. The way we produce food and what we eat contributes to the loss of natural ecosystems and declining biodiversity. When land is degraded, it reduces the soil's ability to take up carbon, and this exacerbates climate change.
Adaptation and mitigation have to go together. There is no possibility for anybody to say, oh, climate change is happening and then we just adapt to it. The capacity to adapt is limited, and it certainly depends on the process, it depends on the region and so forth, and there are some regions and some places, especially in the low latitudes, where vulnerability is extreme, and even in those countries when there is an emphasis on adaptation in their development strategies, mitigation should play a key role.
We see increasing pressures of land degradation, desertification in places like Africa, Asia, and South America. And so the sharing of technologies in that regard was important. The importance of government support was also called out. So it's not only about a cooperation between the North and the South, but also about governments supporting local land managers to improve the way they manage land and make that more sustainable. An important element within that discussion was the ability for smallholders to access credit. So the importance of accessing financial resources to be able to change the way you manage the land is important.
One of the problems is how we actually measure and estimate emissions from the farming sector. And it's easy for energy. You take the tons of coal and multiply it by a number or whatever. Land is much more complex. And at the moment, we don't have inventories that really truly reflect in many countries the kind of diet that livestock use, the type of production systems that are in place, which your question really highlights. And I think the big challenge, if we're moving forward in the policy world, is to do it on a better evidence base so that farmers are better informed and incentivised about the kind of production systems that they actually use.
Chefs from all over America are cooking up a storm at the Eat Vancouver Food and Cooking Festival. As Archie Rose Natividad tells us that these culinary wizards are supporting a great cause. Watch this.
Food and Cooking Festival comes back to town with a bang. The 16th annual food festival has brought chefs from all over North America in support of a great cause, Project Chef.
Award-winning chefs have brought their talents to Vancouver not only to collaborate, but also to aid in raising proceeds for charity. Local chefs have joined forces with highly sought-out guest chefs to prepare for a series of dinners that help in elevating the Vancouver food scene and simultaneously give back to the community.
So we have gone after chefs from now out. All our guest chefs come from outside BC, but now you've got an Iron Chef from Los Angeles, you've got a James Beard chef from Portland, you've got a chef who ran Frenchie in Paris for a year. So this event is, it's quite special for Vancouver, and it's only going to get better. So great chefs, great food, very unique, and they're a competitive bunch, so they want to do a better job each year. So to bring chefs from outside BC, who are working chefs, who own their restaurants in their kitchens, to leave their kitchen, they really don't come for this event. They come for the collaborative dinner. And the collaborative dinner is what we put together. We've done 10 dinners over the last 2 days. And the model is all of those chefs that I provide, they come out tonight. Because this is what provides the charitable donation. So each year our goal is to raise more money, and we have a local charity that educates elementary school children on healthy food and cooking, so how perfect is that?
Well, tonight we made a shrimp cracker as our base, made in-house, so it's dehydrated and deep fried, so nice and crunchy. And then on top we have a Graviche sauce, so a classic French sauce, with a bit of celeriac folded in, and it's topped with Tabico and fresh dill.
The chefs are not only delighted to put their heart into cooking for a great cause, but also find the joy in the opportunity to share their passion for food.
It's a totally different experience. Like our kitchen back in Edmonton is closed, so I don't normally get to see people eating or talking about it. So to get to talk to people and explain what we do and where we're from and see them eat and see them enjoy and like have them tell you like, I love this, this was unexpected. It's just like a good feeling. It's kind of a reaffirmation of what you're doing.
Lee Jun Pak, one of the judges of Top Chef Canada, gave us a scoop of what's coming up in the Vancouver food scene.
I swear it's the Filipino food. The Filipino cuisine and Filipino food scene is going to blow up. Give us maybe another 5 years in Canada and Vancouver. It's a little bit slower, but I'm starting to see it, and so I love that. I'm rooting for it. I was like, we desperately need it. It's something Vancouver doesn't have as much exposure to. And yet we have such an amazing Filipino community, amazing talent, and that's the whole point, is to discover flavors from another country. So multicultural here, huge Asian influence in Vancouver, so we start to see that in our food a lot. You know, we have Filipino-inspired food, Asian-inspired food, Italian and Japanese. There's just so exotic once you get in here.
With the different types of cuisines found in Vancouver, it's exciting to see that Filipino food is on the rise. Reporting from Eat Vancouver, my name is Archie Rose, the TV Dad Yi, and I'm 1 with 25.
Thank you, Archie Rose.
Thank you, Archie Rose. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards and Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Alma Angeles and
we're 1 with 25.